The fire is dying. Somewhere past the last flicker of orange light, something is moving through the grass. Slow, deliberate, patient. The whole camp hears it. Nobody speaks. A child stirs, and a hand presses gently over their mouth. Out there in the dark is a creature that has killed before, that knows exactly what sleeping meat sounds like, and every person awake right now knows one wrong move decides who sees morning. Now rewind, not to one dramatic night, but to every night, for roughly 3,000 years. Long before agriculture, before permanent shelter, before anything resembling safety, as we understand it, this was simply Tuesday. Our ancestors didn't camp in the wild occasionally, the way we do now for recreation. They lived there, slept there, raised children there. And the wild didn't pause its business because humans had arrived. Cave lions stalked the grasslands of Ice Age Europe. Dire wolves moved through North America in packs built for exactly this kind of hunt. Leopards in Africa learned, generation after generation, that human camps sometimes meant an easy meal, especially the old, the young, the sick, anyone who couldn't run. This wasn't rare misfortune. Anthropologists studying predation patterns on early hominids have found bite marks on ancient bones, evidence that our ancestors were, for a long stretch of prehistory, prey as often as predator. Here's what's easy to forget from the comfort of a locked door and a mattress. For most of human existence, surviving until morning wasn't guaranteed. It was a nightly negotiation, and the terrifying part is that they had almost none of what we'd consider real protection. No walls thick enough to stop a bite, no locks, no weapons capable of dropping a bear in one strike. What they had instead was something more interesting than brute force. They had strategy, cooperation, and an intimate, hard-earned understanding of exactly what scared these animals away. And over tens of thousands of years, that knowledge became the difference between a species that survived and one that became a footnote in some other predator's fossil record. The single greatest survival tool ancient humans possessed against nighttime predators wasn't a weapon, it was fire. And the fact that we discovered it so early, somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, before farming, before pottery, before almost anything else we consider foundational to civilization, tells you exactly how urgent this problem was. Fire works because the fear it produces isn't learned, it's wired into the nervous system of nearly every land animal on Earth. Wildfires have shaped ecosystems for as long as ecosystems have existed, and the animals that survived those fires were, overwhelmingly, the ones that fled at the first sign of flame or smoke. That instinct got passed down, generation after generation, until it became automatic. A lion doesn't need to have a bad personal experience with fire to avoid it. Its ancestors already did the learning for it. So ancient humans built their nights around this one discovery. They kept fires burning through the darkest hours, often in rotating shifts, because a fire that dies at 2 a.m. is worse than no fire at all. It signals exactly when the camp's guard drops. Archaeological sites across Africa, Europe show hearths positioned at the center or edge of camps, angled to maximize visibility, and light coverage across sleeping areas. Some evidence suggests early humans deliberately used fire in rings, or lines, creating a barrier of light and smoke a predator would have to cross to reach anyone sleeping. It wasn't perfect. Fire needed fuel, constant tending, dry conditions, but it turned the vulnerable hours of night into something closer to manageable risk. Every crackle and spark was, in effect, a message broadcast into the dark: something dangerous is here, something that controls the one force every animal has been taught to fear. And for a species without claws, without natural night vision, without speed, that message may have been the single most important sentence early humans ever learned to say. Fire alone couldn't do all the work. It needed eyes to back it up, because a fire tended by no one is just a light show for anything watching from the tree line. So ancient humans built something almost as important as fire itself: the watch. Anthropological studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, groups like the Hadza in Tanzania or the Juhanzai in the Kalahari, whose lifestyles closely mirror ancient survival patterns, show a consistent pattern researchers believe stretches back tens of thousands of years. Someone was almost always awake. Not the whole group, that would be exhausting and unsustainable, but a rotating handful of sentinels cycling through the night in shifts, watching the tree line, listening for the specific sounds that didn't belong. This wasn't casual vigilance, it was a skill, refined, and passed down like any other survival technique, taught to children the same way tool-making was taught. Experienced watchers learned to distinguish the ordinary night, wind through branches, insects, distant birds, from the wrong kind of quiet, the pause that happens when something large and deliberate is moving carefully, a snapped twig at the wrong rhythm, a rustle that stopped when it should have continued, a change in the air, the particular silence that falls when smaller animals sense a predator and freeze. These were the details a trained ear caught long before a predator got close enough to matter. And it wasn't only the designated watcher doing the work. Human sleep itself cooperated. Even in rest, the brain cycles through lighter stages, where it stays partially responsive to unfamiliar sounds, a built-in secondary alarm system layered beneath conscious watch. So even if the sentinel's attention drifted for a moment, sleeping bodies around the fire weren't entirely unguarded. Two systems, one deliberate and one biological, working together through every dark hour, buying the camp the only thing that ever really mattered out there. Enough warning to react before it was too late. Warning only matters if it's followed by action, and this is where ancient humans stopped being passive prey and became something far more dangerous to confront. When the watch caught movement, the entire camp's response happened in seconds, and it was almost never one person facing the threat alone. Noise came first, shouting, banging tools together, anything loud and sudden. This wasn't panic, it was strategy. Predators rely heavily on the element of surprise. A hunt built around stealth falls apart the moment that stealth is gone. A sudden explosion of noise from a group of adult humans standing upright, moving toward the threat rather than away from it, contradicted everything a predator. Prey flees. Prey doesn't advance, screaming, waving fire-lit branches through the dark like some that has never once considered running. And that's the second layer, weapons, specifically fire-tipped spears and burning branches pulled straight from the hearth. Archaeological evidence of sharpened, fire-hardened wooden spears dates back several 100,000 years, among the oldest deliberately shaped hunting tools ever recovered. At night, these weren't just for killing, they were for extending the reach of fire itself, turning a single flame into several moving points of light and heat surrounding the threat from multiple directions at once, and cutting off the easy angles of approach a predator depends on. Then came numbers. A lone human is a calculation a predator can win. 10 humans, upright, loud, coordinated, converging from different angles, is a calculation that stops making sense entirely. Predators across the animal kingdom hunt by isolating individuals from groups precisely, because groups are exponentially harder to bring down safely. And this instinct cuts both ways. A cohesive, aggressive group response didn't just scare a predator off for one single night. Repeated failed attempts, over years and generations, taught local predator populations that this particular group of humans simply wasn't worth the risk at all. The best defense was the one a predator never even got the chance to test, and this is where ancient humans quietly became excellent geographers. Long before the sun went down, before the fire was even built, the real defense against nighttime predators had already been decided by where the camp was placed. Wind direction mattered enormously. Camps were often positioned so prevailing winds carried human scent away from likely predator approach routes, or in some so the scent drifted toward open ground where an approaching animal would smell humans long before it could see them, triggering that inherited caution before the encounter ever became close or dangerous. Some anthropological reconstructions of hunter-gatherer movement patterns suggest groups deliberately avoided camping downwind of dense brush or tree lines for exactly this reason, favoring exposure over concealment. Terrain did the rest of the work. High ground offered visibility in every direction and made silent approach nearly impossible. A predator crossing open, elevated ground has nowhere to hide its movement or its intent. Camps backed against rock faces, cliffs, or dense natural barriers eliminated entire directions of attack, forcing any threat to approach from a narrow, predictable, heavily watched front, instead of surrounding the group from multiple sides at once. Water source close enough for daily survival, but never so close that the camp sat directly on a nighttime animal thoroughfare, since predators and prey alike tend to converge on water after dark. None of this required understanding predator psychology in any formal, conscious sense. It required generations of trial and painful error, passed down as instinct disguised as tradition. Camp here, not there. Face this direction. Sleep with your back to the stone. By the time a predator's silhouette actually appeared at the edge of the firelight, the odds had usually already been quietly, invisibly stacked against it hours earlier, long before a single person had even gone to sleep. Now, let's be honest, because a video like this would be dishonest if it pretended these defenses always worked. They didn't. Not always, and not everywhere. The fossil record carries the proof. At Swartkrans in South Africa, ancient hominid bones bear puncture marks matching the exact spacing of leopard canines, evidence that early humans were at times simply prey, dragged from wherever they'd been sleeping into the branches above to be eaten at leisure. The Tong child, one of the earliest hominid fossils ever discovered, shows damage to the skull consistent with a large bird of prey, a reminder that threats didn't only come crawling low through the grass, some came from above, was already far too late to react. These weren't failures of intelligence or effort, They were the brutal edge cases where careful preparation met unlucky circumstance, and circumstance won. A fire that burned low because fuel ran out faster than expected. A watch that fell asleep after too many exhausting days without proper rest. A camp forced to settle in unfamiliar territory during a migration without time to properly read the wind or study the terrain the way generations before them had. A predator desperate enough, injured, or starving, or simply too old to hunt its normal prey, that the usual inherited caution stopped applying entirely. This is the pattern that repeats through almost every historical account of predator attacks on early humans. Something had broken. The normal equation had shifted just enough, and when it did, no amount of fire, or noise, or numbers could fully guarantee the outcome that night. But here's what's easy to miss inside the tragedy of those they were exceptions. The overwhelming majority of nights, across hundreds of thousands of years and countless generations, ended the same unremarkable way they began, with everyone waking up, stretching, and starting the day as if nothing had happened at all. The defenses weren't perfect, they never needed to be. They only needed to work often enough, night after night, for a fragile, clawless, slow-running species to still be standing here, telling the story instead of becoming someone else's forgotten meal. Zoom out far enough, and something bigger comes into focus. Every fire built, every watch kept, every camp placed just right against the wind, these weren't isolated decisions made fresh each night. They were the raw material of culture itself, the rules about who watches first, where the fire goes, how loud to shout. These got told, retold, turned into stories, warnings, and eventually myths about monsters in the dark that could be kept away by the right behavior. Long before language could explain instinct, instinct built the rituals that language would later carry forward. And something even stranger happened alongside it. The nightly threat of predation didn't just produce defenses, it produced bonds, groups that trusted each other to keep watch, that respected the person who noticed the wrong kind of silence, that moved together instead of scattering. Those groups survived at higher rates than the ones who didn't. Cooperation wasn't a nice cultural addition to human life. Out there, in the dark, it was load-bearing. The instinct to protect the group, to wake others, to stand shoulder to shoulder against something bigger and stronger, may be one of the oldest threads connecting every human society that came after. So when a predator today gives a human wide berth, when a mountain lion abandons a fresh kill at the sound of a voice, it isn't just individual instinct at work. It's the accumulated weight of hundreds of thousands of nights, just like the one that opened this video. Nights of fire, of watching eyes, of spears raised and voices raised louder. Nights that taught the wild something it never forgot. So picture it again. The fire is dying to embers. Something moves in the grass. But this time, know what's actually happening in that darkness. Somewhere out there, an old inherited memory is telling that animal exactly what your ancestors spent 100,000 nights teaching it. This is not worth the risk. Move on.